I'm John Gould, and I do some writing about the state of Maine. And every so often somebody comes and asks me where in the world I get all these things that I set down about the people that live in Maine and the things that go on here. Well, one morning I was working in my shop, and I looked up and saw Newt Hinckley coming. And I thought that if I should just turn on my tape machine, that might answer some of these people who ask me that question. Now listen.
Hi, John.
Oh, hi, Newt. Hi, Newt. Come on in. Come on in.
Gosh, what a beautiful day.
Isn't this something special?
Yeah. What are
Sit
you
down.
doing? What are you doing?
Oh, I was just doing Harold Jameson a favor. He needed a new stern in his skiff, and I told him I'd fix it up for him.
Oh.
But I'm awful glad you came. I was just hoping something would interrupt me and give me an excuse to stop here. Sit down, sit down.
Yeah.
Here, let me get my pipe going.
Yeah.
Well, what's going on up to Friendship Village?
Well, by gosh, they got more summer people up there. It's really crowded up there. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, this is the time of year for 'em.
Yeah, really something. I came down. I got my hod here. I got to get a hod of clams because the little missus sent me down because we got company coming down from Boston, and they love those clams.
Oh, they like clams.
So it's almost low tide. So
yeah, you got a little while to wait. Well, sit and take it easy. What are these summer tourists doing up there to do these store? Anything in particular?
No, not anything except crowds.
Yeah.
Of course, Elzada's going out of her mind, but I never saw anything the likes of what I looked across the street on their lawn, though, and he's got some old traps for sale down there, John. Now,
oh, yes. Yeah. Didn't you know about that?
No, I didn't hear.
Oh, yeah. Duty had a dream.
Oh, for God's sake, yeah.
He dreamt that he was out hauling traps, and he pulled one up, and it had a mermaid in it. Well, of course, this was quite a surprise to Duty, even in a dream. But he said that this mermaid in the dream reached right up out of this lobster pot and handed him a bright, new, crisp $100 bill.
Oh, brother.
Well, then he woke up, and he thought, he says, this must be some kind of a portent. He says, that this means something. And he got to thinking it over, and he came to Elzada, and says, you suppose that the summer tourists would be fool enough to buy old lobster traps to take home for decorations and things?
Yeah.
And she said, well, wouldn't wonder. And he says, well, if I was to offer them, what do you suppose I should put on them for a price? Well, she says, what do you have in mind? And Duty says, well, how about 50 cents? And Elzada says, I think that if any tourist is fool enough to spend 50 cents for an old beat-up trap that isn't any good, he's fool enough to spend $2. Well, you know, he put them out, and he put his sign on them, and he sold 50 of them right off.
For gosh sake.
Yeah, and he got the $100 that the mermaid had offered him.
For gosh sake.
And he's got the rest of the season yet to pick up some more.
For heaven's sake.
Yeah.
That's something. I was just in getting some tobacco at Elzada's, and I noticed them across the way, and it's...
Yeah. Well, it's a good deal better than heaving them on the dump.
Yeah.
There's one reason to be glad for summer tourists.
Yeah, you can take the pickups and save the gas going down to the dump.
Yeah.
I was in, just as I said, getting some tobacco, and this gal came in all tight pants and those wild flowers on it.
Oh, yeah.
Bright colors and everything. And she, up to Elzada, I was leaning against the ice cream chest, just beating around the price of lobster. Do you know what that price of lobster is now?
It's up over $2.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, good news.
So anyway, she came in and she mentioned something about, do you have a fountain? and Elzada says, what? And she says, fountain, I want to wash my apple.
Wash an apple?
Yeah, well, you know, these summer folk, you and I would actually just rub it off in our pants and that'd be it. But she wants some water, so I said, she wants water. And Elzada says, oh, water. Oh, for heaven's sakes, right over there in the corner. There's a sink, go over. And so she's yelling at the summer woman as she's walking over to the water, and she says, oh, don't mind. She says, don't mind a bit. She says, I say but when I should say boat.
Yes. And now, isn't that good?
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
You never come out of that place with a little
No,
story
there's
like
always
that.
something.
Yeah.
Now, come to the word bought. How do you spell it?
Gosh, you spelled the same way as you spell boat.
Yeah. These things puzzle me all the time. I suppose that story of the fountain and the woman that washed her apple will be all over town. You heard about Dougie Toothache's nosebleed?
Yes, I heard they had quite a time about it.
Yeah. Well, there were two stories. There's the one that happened and the one that traveled all over town. All that happened was that Dougie woke up about 1 o'clock in the morning and he had a nosebleed. And they couldn't stop it, and I guess he was in no danger, but it scared him, you know. And so in the excitement, his wife put him in the pickup and ran him over to the hospital. Well, this was fine. They cured it and fixed it the minute he got there, but the doc thought that Dougie ought to stay the night, so he did, and the wife came home. Well, the next morning, his wife went into Elzada store, and because her best friend was standing there inside the door, and this best friend snubbed her. Wouldn't speak to her at all, just walked off, you know, and broke her heart until she found out what the story was. And the story that was going around town was that she'd beat Dougie up, and this best friend didn't like that. Yeah. Oh, boy. Been having some fun down to Al Holbrook's wharf with that new sign he's got up. You seen it?
I saw it, yeah. I saw it down there. He has it on the steps.
Yeah.
I can understand why he's got it, too.
Well, I was asking him about it, and he said he started it because he said he had a woman come in along about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She said she'd like a lobster. Well, of course, he's all done with his fishermen by 3, you know, and he's got no reason to stay open or anything. And after 3 o'clock, the tourists are a nuisance, unless they want 100 pounds.
Yeah, well, of course, you know that most of these tourists don't know that he gets up 3 o'clock in the morning.
Anyway. This time of year, he's getting up earlier than that. Well, anyway, this woman came in, and she said, Mr. Holbrook, I would like to have a lobster. Well, he put his boots on, he walked across the wharf, he went down the ramp onto the float, jumped over on the pier, went across to his lobster car, opened up the trap, hauled out a crate, unlocked it, and took out a lobster. And he walked back across and jumped over and along and come up the ramp and crossed the wharf, and he went into his little store and threw it on the scales. There, he says, that's just the right kind. He says, £1.25, right on the button. And she looked at it, and she says, now, if that's all that way, she says, I think I'd better have 2.
For gosh sakes.
Well, Al never said a word. He walked back across the wharf. He went down the ramp, across the pier, onto the float, and opened up the thing. He never said a word. He got his crate up and took out another one, and he came back, the same long process, up the ramp and across the wharf, and he went into the shop and threw the second one into the pan on the scales with the first one. Well, this made a little commotion, so the 2 lobsters flapped their tails, and one of them jumped right out of the pan onto the floor. You know. And at this point, this woman says, now, Mr. Holbrook, are you sure these lobsters are fresh? Well, Al decided if he was going to do business with that kind of people that he'd better put up a little sign. So he put up the sign. But there's more to it. Did you hear about the fellow that came from Idaho?
No, I didn't hear that.
Well, Al put this sign up, no retail sales after 3 o'clock, and he was sitting there one afternoon, and he'd had a busy day. He had 20 or 30 fishermen out, and they'd all brought in big catches, and they kind of tucked him out, and he was sitting there with his feet up, watching them throb, and this character showed up, and he had the pink pants on that you tell about, and he says, now, Mr. Holbrook, I saw your sign, but he says, I'm from Idaho, and I'm wondering if you're going to be nice and get me a lobster, or are you going to be one of these stinking mean down east characters? Well, Al never said a word. He didn't even look up. He just sat there, and he says, no, he says, I'm going to be one of these stinking, nasty down east characters. Yeah. But he told this fellow from Idaho, he says, look, after 3 o'clock, I wouldn't even sell my own mother a lobster. Well, Claudine, you know, Al's mother, lives uptown, and she heard about this. And about a week or 2 later, she had some company. I don't know who it was. Anyway, supper time came, and this woman says, "You know, I do hope you're going to have one of Al's lobsters. I've just got my mouth set for one of Al's lobsters."
Yeah.
Well, Al's mother says, it's after 3 o'clock.
Oh, it's after 3 o'clock.
And, you know, those two women went clear over onto Timber Point and bought 2 lobsters from one of Al's competitors and came home with it. And the next day, everybody in Friendship was over there, you know, twitting Al about how mean he was to his own mother. But you know who had more fun than anybody? His mother, Claudine.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
She told that story all over town. Yeah. That's funny. You got a match there, John?
Yeah, I got matches to burn.
You got matches to burn right here. Go.
I can't seem to keep my pipe going.
Whoop. Gosh, there it is.
That's it. Now suck towards you.
Well, you know, it's funny. Some of the things that you hear through town, and some of the stories that go around, as you were saying, and some of the manners of Maine speech, so to speak.
Well, of course, that's my bread and butter. I get a lot of fun. Someone was telling about the other day they tried to pick up an old feller uptown, and I guess I got that thing going now. An old fellow walking along stopped and said, "Would you like a ride?" And he says, no. He says, "I got a fair wind." And he kept right on hiking.
Kept right on going.
But, you know the expression, right out straight?
Yeah.
You got any idea where it comes from, Newt?
Not a bit, no.
Well, now,
used it all my life. That's
yeah.
All.
You say anybody's right out straight. It means he's too busy to do anything else. He's got his hands full. He's right at it, nip and tuck every minute. You know, right out straight. Well, now that comes from the old days when farmers around Maine used to team with oxen. And there was a chain that ran from New York right back to the load. And when that chain was right out straight, that meant that work was being done, see?
Yeah.
And that's the way those things come over in the Maine language. I was interested if you hear the word fair and square. He'll treat you fair and square. Fair and square means everything's all right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fair and square. Well, it comes from the old shipyards along the Maine coast when fairing was the word for smoothing or planing. And you fared aboard, or you fared. There's an old saying that you can't fair a rough floor by putting a rug on it. Yeah. Well, a timber that was faired and squared was ready to be used, and it's as simple as that. Another one, you got a sloop. Do you know what by and large means?
No.
By and large. We hear that. They use that in Timbuktu if they have occasion to today. But that comes out of the old seafaring lingo of the state of Maine. By is to, I know you know this one, by is to sail by the wind, to tack.
Right.
And to go at large is to go before the wind. You sail a boat. Now, a boat that will handle by and large is good on both maneuvers, and it's the best kind of a boat you can have. We use the term today in our dog licenses. We let dogs run at large. Remember?
Right. Yeah.
By and large. Yeah.
You know, it's funny how these things pick up. It's just like I was down at Duty Griffin's store day before yesterday, and of course, that was a big weekend over the 4th, and gosh, they had tons of people in there again, of course. And this gal was rummaging around in the not the ice cream freezer, the vegetable freezer there they got there, and she was rummaging around and everything. And of course, old Don came in, fisherman, and he came in. He had his mind made up just as he hit the door what he needed in there, and he came in. He kind of stepped in front of this woman, and she took a start and kind of fell backwards. And he said, "Oh, didn't mean to cross your bow." You know. And,
sure.
Same type of thing. It's, you get the seafaring aspects in there. And there's a fellow with just regular, everyday talk again.
I was down on wharf the other day, and you know Charlie Newcomb.
Oh, gosh.
Always fishes with a cigar in his mouth. I don't know whether he ever lights the thing or not. But he had his little peaked swordfish cap on, and he came in, and he had a good catch of lobsters that day. He had a couple of tubs anyway.
Yeah.
And the place was crowded with these summer people. And they were standing rimmed all around the wharf, looking down his boat, you know, while he unloaded and sold his lobsters.
Yeah.
And they like to watch this. This is a real show.
This is a real
Anyway, I sized the thing up, and I went over and leaned over, and I shouted down at Charlie. I says, "Chuck." And he looked up with that peaked swordfish cap and the cigar in his mouth. He says, "Ah." I says, you want to preach for me Sunday? That would throw most people.
Yeah.
It'd throw anybody.
Yeah.
He never blinked an eye. He never turned a hair. He looked up at me and he says, that's up to Vassalboro. I said, yeah. And he says, all right, okay. And he went right back to unload the lobster.
Yeah.
Well, I walked off, but, you got to wonder what those summer people thought of that. They could just picture this old fisherman coming in to preach on Sunday up to Vassalboro. I'll bet some of them went up and went to church at Vassalboro next Sunday.
Probably drummed up a good attendance.
Probably had the best collection all summer.
That minister never knew what hit him.
Oh, dear.
Oh, for God's sakes. Well, it's the same thing, You still play games when the summer folks come in. Of course, we're all little hamish actors in the town anyway. And we,
well, not all of us.
Well, most of us. And anyway, I was walking down the street, and of course, old Eddie there was coming down the street, and I've always had something going with him. And I, just walked along like this, and of course, we folks up here, you never say hi,
Oh, no.
You wouldn't do a thing like that. That's too simple.
Mm-hmm.
So
what do you think?
What do you think, or something like this. So I yelled at him, right across the thing. I said, think it's going to happen?
Yes.
And, 2 or 3 heads turned, on the street. They wanted to see what was coming next. And so he just says, wouldn't wonder. And the two of us kept going. They just don't realize that's the way we say hello,
Kept right on going.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a young fellow, I got acquainted with a fellow who used to be the harbor master in Freeport. His name was Clarence Dixon. We always called him Cappy Dixon.
Oh, gosh.
And he was a genius at setting things up like that and keeping people interested. He always had a story.
Mm.
And one, he could spin them out so that they'd last all night if he had to. But one of his best ones that I remember was the time he fell overboard in the winter off. He was chipping ice on his railway there where he hauled up boats, and he slipped and fell in. Well, of course, you don't fall in the water in the winter without knowing that you've done it, you know.
Absolutely. Mm.
And he had his rubber boots on, but he started swimming towards his wharf, and he had a ladder come down. He was just about to reach out and put his hand on the lower rung of that ladder when something in the water snubbed him up.
Oh, gosh.
Now, you can imagine Cappy telling this story to a bunch of summer people sitting around.
Mm.
Well, it was a rope. It was a line underwater that somehow snagged around his foot, and by golly, there he was, and he just could not get to his ladder.
For gosh sake.
And he'd build this thing up, until people had awful pictures of him drowning, but of course he didn't drown because here he was telling the story. And Cappy would say, but he says, I got to thinking in that emergency of my dear departed old mother.
Oh, for gosh sake.
And he'd build this up. He'd say, something Mother said when I was a boy made me think that I was going to come out of this all right. And he said, with my mother on my mind, I made one last desperate effort, and I kicked extra hard, and I got my hand on the lower rung of that ladder. And he says, after that, I was all right. I got up.
Yeah.
Well, of course, then he'd pause, and he'd light his pipe, and somebody would always ask him, well, what was it your mother said that made you think of her? And well, he says, Mother used to look at me, and Mother would say, Clarence, she'd say, Clarence, you'll never drown, you'll never, never drown. They'll hang you.
Oh, gosh.
One time this Cappy Dixon saw a summer job come in, a little yacht, and there's a couple of newlyweds on it.
Mm.
And they went up to the store to buy some groceries, and while they were gone, Cappy rode out in the dusk and tied a cod line onto their masthead. And he brought it in, and he looped it around the doorknob on his little shanty there on the wharf. After these newlyweds came down and went to bed on the boat, Cappy began sawing on this line, Well, from the masthead, you can get tremendous leverage. And he soon had that boat rocking. He sat there in a rocking chair all night long, sawed on that. And they were going to tell the next morning what a rough night they'd had in the harbor when they found a little piece of cod line dangling from their masthead. But did you ever hear the story of the time that Cappy invented the whistle on his boat, the air whistle?
No.
Well, do you remember the old... No, you're not young enough to remember the old Smith & Lang made one-lung engines that they made for lobstermen?
I sure am. There was a few around when I was a young fellow. I remember I used to love to listen to them. They used to go...
Yeah. That's near enough.
Yeah,
they had a big flywheel that would throw water out of the bilge clear up over the side. Well, they had one cylinder, and on the top of it there was a little petcock that you opened to put in gasoline to prime it. Well, Cappy took that petcock out and put in a little bitty air pump.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a tank, a compression tank on his boat, and he had a whistle. And as he ran the boat, of course, it would build up pressure in his little tank, and when he wanted to blow his whistle, he'd just pull on a lanyard and blow his whistle. And he was the only boat around that had anything like an air whistle on it in those days.
Gosh sakes.
Well, he went into Portland one afternoon, and one night he was coming back, and he decided to take the island run, come on the inside of the islands.
Yeah.
And he was churning along in the moonlight, and it was a beautiful night, and you know those Casco Bay Islands or something, and
they're beautiful.
He was wandering along with his thoughts almost anywhere when he lit his pipe. And this match flared up in his hands right beside the air gauge on that tank. And it said 380 pounds. Well, Cappy used to tell about the great presence of mind that prevailed in him at that moment. He says, I pulled the lanyard on the whistle and clapped it under a hatch so that it kept the whistle blowing. And he said, I threw the wheel hard over and locked it. And he says, I jumped overboard. And when his tender went by, he climbed into it, and he set up on the thwart of this thing, and there he was, going round and round in circles, and the whistle blowing, dead night. He said in a few minutes the lights begun to come on in cottages around the shore. And nothing for him to do but sit there and ride until the fuel ran out, you know. They said somebody called the Coast Guard, and they came out from Portland with a big ship, and they put lights on him. And they spoke him, as the word is, and they asked him what he was doing, and the Cappy told him to go to hell. But he was a great person to entertain the summer people and have fun with them, and always had something funny to say, and he was a great source for stories.